In the name of God, most merciful, ever merciful, and may God's peace and blessings be upon His holy Prophet Muhammad and the purified members of his household and progeny. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajjal farajahum. Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah wa ala al-arwah allati hallat bi fina'ik. عليكم مني جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني بزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. Brothers, sisters and viewers wherever you may be, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. When Yazeed wrote his letter to his governor in Kufa, and his governor Al-Walid ibn Utbah summoned Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam to the palace in Medina, when the Imam had the back and forth with them, he ended up saying, "We are the house of prophethood, and we are the source of the divine message, and we are the location where the angels gather, and we are the resting place of divine mercy. It is with us that God has begun, and it is with us that God will end. And someone like me does not pay allegiance to someone like him." Before that sentence, Imam Hussein alayhi salam says, "And Yazeed is a man corrupted and perverted, a drinker of wine, a killer of the innocent soul, and someone like me does not pay allegiance to someone like him." Today what we want to look at are specifically these last words from Imam Hussein alayhi salam when he says someone like him. We want to look at the personality of Yazeed. What created Yazeed? Who is Yazeed? Who is someone like him? And how is this relevant to us? And from a more political dimension, this will help us also understand why Imam Hussein alayhi salam maintained the same conditions of the peace treaty that was in place between his brother Imam Hassan alayhi salam so long as Muawiyah was in place. So what was so different between Muawiyah and Yazeed that Imam Hussein alayhi salam tells everyone to remain in their homes, in their houses, so long as Muawiyah was in place for almost 10 years? And then when Yazeed becomes the Khalifa, Imam Hussein alayhi salam begins his open confrontation with the new Khalifa. What is so different? So what we want to look at is the constitution of the personality of Yazeed. Truth be told, this is going to be an incomplete presentation because that personality cannot be fully understood without really understanding the personality of Muawiyah, about whom we've already started talking, but it requires a lot more analysis and a lot more presentation that we don't have time to do today. We'll touch on a few points, but we'll leave the details to another time, inshallah. So who is Yazeed? Yazeed is the son of Muawiyah. Muawiyah is the son of Abu Sufyan, Sakhar ibn Harb. Abu Sufyan is the man who is considered to have been one of the chiefs and then later the chief of the mushrikeen of Quraysh in Mecca. He led the open confrontation from the first day against the Holy Prophet when he started talking about Islam and inviting people to this religion. He is behind the majority of the persecution, of the tyranny, of the oppression of those who were Muslims in the city of Mecca. And he tried in all sorts of ways to have the Holy Prophet killed and assassinated and to destroy his religion while the Prophet was in the city of Mecca. To the point where the Holy Prophet leaves the city of Mecca and he ends up in the city of Medina. And a couple of years after he's in the city of Medina, the confrontation takes another shape, and it becomes open battles and war between the mushrikeen and those who are followers of the Holy Prophet. And during that time, Abu Sufyan is the main man who is funding those operations, those battles and those wars from his own private pocket against the Holy Prophet year after year. Battle after battle. All the way to about 2 years before the passing away of the Holy Prophet, when the Holy Prophet enters the city of Mecca as a conqueror. At that point, Abu Sufyan sees that if he continues to fight openly the Holy Prophet, he will most likely end up dying, so he accepts in appearance Islam and enters into this religion, and the Holy Prophet accepts this Islam of his. This is in general who Abu Sufyan is. And inshallah at another time we'll see the role that he played afterwards when the Holy Prophet passes away, how he infiltrated himself and Bani Umayyah back with the Khilafah of Abu Bakr, and then Bani Umayyah became more powerful in the Khilafah of Umar, and then even more powerful in the Khilafah of Uthman. What about from his grandmother's side? The grandmother of Yazeed is the wife of Abu Sufyan, Hind bint Utbah. Hind is no less staunch and full of hatred and animosity and enmity against the person of the Holy Prophet and against his God and against his book and against his religion than was Abu Sufyan. And it started right from the beginning, and it got to a completely new height when the Battle of Badr happened. Because in the Battle of Badr, we have her father and her uncle starting the battle in a duel, and they were killed, the 3 against the 3, the duels that began the Battle of Badr. So she saw her father and her uncle getting killed, and later in the battle her brother and her son were also killed. So this filled her heart with enmity and this desire for true vengeance beyond anything that, you would expect from a normal human being, until when, in the next battles, she wanted to find any way, shape or form to take her revenge from the Holy Prophet, but she couldn't. So she told them to take the revenge from Imam Ali alayhi salam. They came back to her, the slave that she hired. He came back to her and he told her, it's impossible to throw a spear at Ali alayhi salam. The way he moves would be impossible to hit him from far. But she didn't care. She told them the next person, they told them we can hit Hamza, the uncle of the Holy Prophet, referred to as the Lion of God and his messenger. And so she had Hamza killed in that battle, and after he died, she came to his corpse, and she had his eyes and his nose and his ears removed, and other body parts, and she made them into a necklace. And then she ripped open his gut, and she took out his liver and tried to eat it. But she couldn't swallow, so she chewed it and then she spit it out. And now is not the time to go into the details of how she entered into Islam and how much trouble she had accepting this new God that she had to worship. She was saying that these conditions, there's too many conditions the Holy Prophet is imposing on us. The 6 conditions the Holy Prophet gave to the woman to enter into Islam. This is the household. These are the parents that brought into life Muawiyah. His father Abu Sufyan and his mother Hind. So one can only imagine the type of upbringing and the type of value system that they inculcated into this boy of theirs, who would later become, believe it or not, the Khalifa of the Islamic world. Very quickly, without going into the details, we don't have the time. Basically, when the Saqifa happened, when the Holy Prophet passes away, Abu Sufyan is trying to find a way to bring himself and his tribe of Bani Umayyah back into the fold, back to the prestige that they had before Islam in the days of Jahiliyyah. He wants the role of leadership, that he knows there's no way for him to get back when he's been fighting Islam for 20 years, and now the Holy Prophet has passed away, so he wants to seize that opportunity. So he comes to Imam Ali alayhi salam and he makes fun of the ancestry of Abu Bakr, and he tells him, how can someone like him ever become your and my leader? They are a lowly tribe. How about I fill this place up for you with horsemen and fighters, and you take back your right? In the words of Abu Sufyan, he tells him, you take back what is rightfully yours. Imam Ali alayhi salam tells him, go away, all you're looking for is to create fitna. Right away he goes to Abu Bakr. And he presents the same offer to Abu Bakr, who right away accepts this offer from Abu Sufyan. And that's how Bani Umayyah enter back into the fold, and they play the leadership role. Why does Abu Bakr do this? Without going into too much detail, it's because his Khilafah was very weak at this time. Bani Hashim are going to all of them side with Imam Ali alayhi salam. So he doesn't have the most important household in the Islamic world. Al-Ansar, who are made up of two very big tribes, Al-Aws and Al-Khazraj, are not with the Khilafah of Abu Bakr. They see themselves as being worthy of this position, and they side more with Ahlul Bayt. So he needs to find allies. So he has Quraysh in general, and he has the Bedouins, the Arabs, who know nothing about Islam and religion. And now he has Abu Sufyan presenting the sponsorship and the alliance of Bani Umayyah. So he puts his hand in his, and he offers his son, also called Yazeed, the son of Abu Sufyan. He makes him into a governor. And then they make Muawiyah into a commander of an army. And then Muawiyah slowly becomes also a governor of a small area. And then when Yazeed, the brother of Muawiyah, dies, Abu Sufyan is always sitting beside the Khalifa. At this time it's Umar who is the Khalifa, Ibn al-Khattab. At this point, when the news reaches Umar ibn al-Khattab, he tells him, Abu Sufyan asks him, who are you going to replace my son Yazeed with? And he tells him, his brother Muawiyah. And so basically the rulership, the government of Muawiyah is growing as a governor. And I'm not going to go into all the rest of the details during that time and how he becomes more and more powerful over the years during that Khilafah and the Khilafah of Uthman and his battles with Imam Ali alayhi salam, and we spoke about what he did with Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam. So this is the grandfather and the grandmother of Yazeed, and a little bit about his father. What about his mother? His mother is called Maysoon bint Bahdal. She was a Christian woman from a Christian tribe, of those Arab tribes who lived in that area of Sham. There's a lot to say here. Let's skip over the details very quickly. That entire region of northern Iraq and Sham to present-day Syria was mainly Christians. Until the year, historians tell us, until year 232 after the Hijrah, 3 centuries after the Hijrah, in the time of al-Mutawakkil. During that time, it was mainly Christian tribes living in those areas. And those tribes were not all of the same level of Christianity. These were the Bedouins who knew nothing, and they were not really in any way, shape or form different from the Arabs of the Jahiliyyah. When the Muslims entered into those lands, there's a plague that happened. For those of you who are interested in the history of plagues, since we're going through a type of a plague right now with Corona, we are told, if you go back into the history of plagues in Islamic history, one of the first plagues that happened is called the plague of Amwas. And it happened during that time. And it killed tens of thousands of people, and it happened in that general region of Sham. Included in those who died at that time were many of the soldiers that were part of the army of Muawiyah. So Muawiyah needed to find a way to replenish his army with people. So he started creating a lot of alliances. Some of those alliances were with those Arab and other Christian tribes who lived in those areas. And one of the best ways to establish those alliances is to get married. And this happened a lot at that time. So it's kind of a political marriage. When he marries from them, then it creates a rapport and a political and a diplomatic tie. And he used a lot of their men of those very big tribes, the tribe of Kelb at that time, to basically replenish his army. Today we are told that tribe, if you go back in their history, you see that they were Syrian Orthodox Christians. So very quickly, that woman enters into the life of Muawiyah as his wife, as we said, through this political tie. And the next year after their marriage is about 24 years after Hijrah, so around year 25, 26, Yazeed is born. When he is born, she doesn't ever convert to Islam. When he is born, she goes back to live with her family in the area of Palmyra, in Syria. And for the next years, Yazeed is entirely raised in that area of the world, completely cut off from anything happening in the big cities, including completely cut off from Islam. He is raised in that world. And as we said, it's not the world of true Christianity, it's the world of the Arabs of Jahiliyyah. So he is living and growing up with means to everything, access to everything, as you would expect the son of a king or a ruler. And he's basically spending his youth in learning poetry and drinking wine and chasing women and learning how to hunt and so on and so forth. When he gets a little bit older, he starts splitting his time between living with his maternal family and coming to live from time to time in the palace of his father, but with the best friends, his best friends being the courtiers, the people who work in the court of his father, all of them Christians. Because Muawiyah hired a lot of Christians in his government. He hired people from, they were Romans, they were Greeks, and they were Syrians of a Christian background. And anyone who goes back in history and reads their biographies, this becomes very clear. And there's a whole lot of reasons behind that. We don't have time to go through those details. So basically, Yazeed is growing up in a world where he is never exposed to Islam. He wouldn't even know what Islam looks like if it was right in front of him. And then, afterwards, Yazeed is starting to be prepared to become the ruler of the Islamic world. In a world where that actually matters, in a society where it actually matters to be or not to be a Christian. It's not a secular society. And this creates all sorts of problems. When you look at the personality of Yazeed, as we mentioned very quickly, we said there is nothing in his personality that gives any impression that he was in any way fit to rule. If you go back in his biography, in the manner in which he conducted himself, we are told that he would wear silk and gold, that he would spend his time drinking, that he fornicated with men and women, that he spent his time around women who are singers and dancers away from the city whenever he could. And as you go through this type of personality, you also discover he spent his life in entertainment. He had dogs, he had cats, he had felines, all sorts of lions and leopards, and he had monkeys, and he spent a lot of time with them. He had a monkey called Abu Qais. He called him Abu Qais. He was his preferred monkey. He would tell the people that this monkey was actually a scholar from Bani Israel who had performed some big sins, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala transformed him into this monkey. But he liked him very much. And he would sit and he would drink and he would give the leftovers of his wine to this monkey. And he would make that monkey wear gold and silk, and he would make him race. He would put him on donkeys or mules or other animals, and he would make him race with others. And he would sit with his companions and they would recite poetry about how good of a racer Abu Qais was. And one day Abu Qais fell off being drunk. He fell off and he died. And Yazeed got so grieved by this, so sad by this, that he declared an official mourning for this Islamic State. And for 3 days, people came, and as they say in in the books of history, Zurafat. So basically lines, people formed lines to come and express their condolences to Yazid for the death of his monkey, for whom, after the 3 days, a mausoleum was erected and where the monkey was buried. This is Yazid. And so when Muawiyah starts, as we said, to prepare Yazid to become the ruler of the Islamic world, no one thought that this is something that should ever happen. Even those who are close to Muawiyah thought that this is a mistake. Politically, strategically, this is wrong. But it quickly became apparent that when they would come to Muawiyah and start questioning, Muawiyah would punish them. He would give the impression that he's listening to them, but then there's always a consequence. It's as though they're questioning the opinions and the judgment of Muawiyah, and so he can question their loyalty to him and to the eventual Khalifa. And some of them were removed from being governors and from their official positions. So those who were smarter started to go to Yazid directly and telling him, you need to tone down your public image. You need to fix it a little bit so that we can at least work with something and present you as a Khalifa to the people. One such instance is, for instance, when Muawiyah called a man who was referred to as one of the Dawahi, one of the big strategists, one of the big thinkers, political thinkers, a lot of experience in all sorts of aspects of life, one of the close people to Muawiyah at that time, Al-Mughira ibn Shu'bah. Muawiyah tells him, what do you think? I'm about to appoint my son Khalifa, what do you think about that? Mughira tells him, I don't think that's a really good idea. His public image is really, really difficult to pass to people. How about you take a few years and think about it, and maybe we can work on something. So basically he advised against it. And then he went to Ziyad ibn Abi, a man that Muawiyah later said that this is my brother, and basically he was known to be the son of an adulteress. No one knew who his father was, but Muawiyah wanted to basically bring him back into the fold. So he went to him and he told him, what do you think? I want to do this. He tells him the same thing. And he tells him there are a few people in this Islamic world that everybody will consider to be a lot more worthy of this position. And he mentions the four that are mentioned in the instructions that Muawiyah left to Yazid. Ibn Zubayr, Abdullah ibn Zubayr, Abdul Rahman ibn Abi Bakr, Abdullah ibn Umar, and Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. He tells him, so what should we do? He tells him, there's a narration, and of course this is now, we're reading this 14th centuries, could be made up. There's a narration from the Holy Prophet that says that there will be an army who will fight in Constantinople in Turkey. And that army, whoever is part of that army, all of the sins are forgiven. So maybe we can include Yazid as part of that army. The problem is that that battle had already taken place. So Muawiyah prepared another battalion, another army of soldiers to send to that same region, and we said all we need to do is to include Yazid as part of those people. Someone needs to see him as part of that army, and then we can say that he was included in the prophetic tradition of the Prophet, that Yazid was part of the army whose sins have been forgiven. So Muawiyah tells his son, and Yazid goes, along with a caravan of wine and entertainment, and his wife Kulthum that he never went anywhere without. But he didn't go all the way to where the battle was actually happening. He stopped in a monastery belonging to his uncle, and he remained there. And the rest of the army went, and the battle started, and the plague happened, and the people were dying, and they were battling, and Muawiyah is asking news, and they tell him Yazid is nowhere to be seen. He remained behind in the monastery drinking and partying. And so he wrote to him, he told him, all we need from you is to just show up, so that we can write that you were there. So finally he shows up. And then they bring news back to Muawiyah that he showed up. And that was one of the hadith that were used, that Yazid is part of an army, and he led an army in Constantinople. He was one of the great commanders of the Islamic world. And so, we fast forward. This continues, and when Al-Mughira ibn Shu'bah hears, we just mentioned him, let's finish his story. So he had advised Muawiyah against putting Yazid as a ruler. But now he sees that everything is now in place and he is going to become a ruler. So he goes to the city of Kufa, And he finds all the scholars of the city of Kufa and he tells them, if you want to have a strong position in this city and a strong position in the government of Bani Umayyah, you need to go, rush to Muawiyah right now and pay your allegiance to Muawiyah that his son Yazeed is going to be your Khalifa. So they go. They listen to Al-Mughira ibn Shu'bah and they rush and they pay their allegiance to Muawiyah. As soon as he sees them, he tells them, how much did you pay your souls for? And they told him 30,000 each. So Al-Mughira basically paid each of them 30,000 to come and pay allegiance to Yazeed. And Muawiyah tells them, how fickle and vain is this world that you can buy and sell people's religion and souls with 30,000. And then he accepted their swearing of allegiance to Yazeed. And this is, of course, brings us back to the role of bribery and the role of scholars and so on and so forth that we don't have time to talk about. Why are we talking about all of this? Very quickly, if we open a bracket here, let's look at the life and the upbringing of Yazeed. The environment in which he came up, the environment in which he was raised, was obviously a huge factor leading to Yazeed becoming the person that he was. And we can look at this from different points. But before we jump into that, just a few remarks so that nothing we say is taken out of context. The first remark is that, of course, no one thinks that your environment and your upbringing are everything. Of course that it's nothing but one of the factors that contribute to shaping and molding the personality that you will have. And this is an important point to mention. Even the Holy Quran makes this point. When it talks about someone like the wife of Fir'aun, for instance, being an amazing woman, a righteous woman, growing up in that environment. She is growing up in the house of Fir'aun, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praises her faith. Or when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about the son of Prophet Nuh alayhi salam. Imagine having Prophet Nuh alayhi salam as your father, and he ends up with al-kafirin, as the Quran says, one of the disbelievers. He rejects the call of his father and he decides to go over a mountain instead of going on the ship with his father, and he dies and he is considered of the kuffar. He rejected the call of his father and his invitation. Upbringing is only a part of the equation. No one will say that it is the entire equation. So everybody agrees with that. But this is also to say that we reject the claim of those who say or who may think that guidance is all in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Regardless of what you do, in the end it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who will either guide you or not. It's true, everything is in the hands of God, including your eventual and ultimate guidance. But this doesn't take away from the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put causes and habits and trends and principles in place, and you need to respect those. And having the right environment, generally speaking, leads to, if you create a righteous environment, it leads to a righteous outcome. This is a general rule, and there are exceptions. And if you have an awful environment, it leads to awful results. And this is a general rule, and there are exceptions. There are amazing people who come out of a very broken environment, very corrupt environment. And there's the opposite. So we're not talking about the exceptions, we're talking about the general rule. That's one. The second point is that we don't want to put the entire responsibility of the personality of Yazeed on, let's say, his Christian background. I think it's important to keep the Christian background in mind. But we're not claiming, for instance, that someone needs to live in complete isolation or in complete seclusion from anyone who is of a different worldview or ideology or belief system. That's not what we're saying. There were real Christians at that time. Christians that the Holy Quran praised. Christians that the Holy Prophet respected. Christians that Imam Ali alayhi salam respected. The Christians who lived in the area of Najran were respected by the Holy Prophet. The Christians who lived as monks in many of the churches, in many of the Christian villages in the Islamic world, they were very respected, considered honorable people. No issues with them. The issue was with those Arabs of the Jahiliyyah, in this case, some of them being Christians, who, in the words of Imam Ali alayhi salam, when he talked about them once, he says, all they have kept from what they think is Christianity is drinking of wine. That's all they know of Christianity. They know nothing else. None of the values of Christianity have remained in those people. Those are the people that Muawiyah allied himself with. And this is the background against which Yazid was raised. And it's naive for us to think, for instance, that you can just enter into an environment and not see that environment erode your personality and your value system. Of course, it's going to have a great impact on it. And the third point has to do with this importance of preparing ourselves when you enter into that environment. So we're not saying that you seclude or isolate. One, you have to understand that environment, and two, you have to prepare yourself. You have to create a type of immunity so that whatever you are faced with, you can deal with. And you can never overestimate your immunity, because it's constantly being bombarded and it's constantly being eroded. And so you therefore have to constantly charge it with something. On the side of knowledge and on the side of your heart, your spirituality. Hence the importance of these types of gatherings. Hence the importance of the religious seasons that we have in the year and trying to leverage them. This is a spiritual recharge that we have. Otherwise, the external bombardment will erode your value system. And then, related to this, as we said, is that you can never overestimate your immunity. That's a grave mistake, to think that because, let's say you had a background and you were raised in a certain way, you read a couple of books, you went to certain courses, then you're good for life. Absolutely not. So long as you're confronted with something different, that is constantly eroding at you, consciously or unconsciously. So you need to be countering that all the time. Putting all of that aside now, these were the remarks that we wanted to say. Now about some Islamic teachings related to this. The first one having to do with your environment. What kind of environment have you created for yourself? What have you surrounded yourself with? Where does your energy, your social energy, where does it come from? Does it come from social media? Does it come from the Hollywood industry of shows and music and movies? Does it only come from friends? And we'll talk about friends in a second. What kind of environment have you surrounded yourself with? And you get to choose that, especially at a certain age. You're making choices every day. Where is your energy coming from? And what is influencing the way you think and the way you are? Have you created a routine for yourself? What does your daily routine look like? How much of that energy is spiritual? How much of that energy is actually making you better? Versus how much is just intaking whatever society is throwing at you? What does your weekly routine look like? What does your monthly routine look like? Do you have times where you sit back and think where you are in your life and where are you going and what type of human being you want to be and what you're being fed? What are you allowing in your life to become that person? And this needs to be a constant struggle and a constant reminder with yourself. And then if we move to this idea of friendship, who are your friends? Who are the people that you have let come into your life? They will influence you, no matter how you think and how strong you may think you are. Their thinking influences you. Their values influence you. The words they use when they talk influence you. Are they making you a better person? There's a beautiful verse in the Holy Quran. It's a scary verse. It says, الْأَخِلَّاءُ يَوْمَئِذٍ بَعْضُهُمْ لِبَعْضٍ عَدُوٌّ. Those who were best friends in this world, in the afterlife, they shall be enemies. Except those who are God-fearing. إِلَّا الْمُتَّقِينَ. If you had friends who brought you to Allah, whose face, whose actions, whose conduct reminded you of religion or made you a better person, those are going to be your friends in the afterlife too. And everyone else, the Quran says, they're going to be your enemy. Your enemy means they will harm you. There's something happening to you. Be careful who you let enter into your life and who you let influence your life. And in the same line of thought, for many of you, I think you're in this beautiful phase of your lives where you're deciding on a spouse, a partner. What is your criteria? Who are you going to associate with and build your life with? Often I think we think we can make that person better. We can change that person. If that's how you're already thinking from the beginning, then you know that there's a gap. This is not someone who's going to make you better. Most likely it may be someone who will only become one more stumbling block in your way to become better, or who will pull you down. Don't only think of this world when you choose that partner. Think of the next as well. And if you're already married, it's not too late. Have you thought about the idea that you need to sit with that life partner of yours and make sure your priorities are aligned? That you're actually moving together towards the same end in this life and the next? And if you haven't, why haven't you done it yet? What's missing? You have to put your priorities in life in the right place. This is the reason why we're looking at a personality like Yazeed. It's because of the upbringing. It's because of the environment. There's an action, reaction. This environment produces a certain type of result. And many of us, I think, we overestimate how much we can actually resist all these factors and how much they will actually influence us. In any case, maybe one last point that I can mention and we move on. And this one has to do with parenting. Parenting is not about preaching and teaching with words. And without getting into the whole psychology of a child basically when they're born and they come into this life, at first they see especially their mother, but both of their parents, as an extension of who they are. They don't see them as another person. And when finally they start seeing them as another person, they view their behavior as the template and the standard of the manner in which you're supposed to behave in this world. This is all unconscious. So to teach the child, maybe once the child reaches a certain level of maturity where they can think abstractly, they can start understanding what you're telling them with words, maybe you will have an influence then with your words. Until then, you're actually teaching them with every action that you're doing. You want the child to pray, you need to pray in front of them. You want the child to speak gently in front of them. You want the child to memorize the Quran in front of them. Don't tell them memorize the Quran and you haven't. Don't tell them pray and you haven't. Don't expect them to be of a certain behavior and you're not preaching that day in and day out, so that it's clear in their mind what the right is, because they consider you the right. Whether they're doing it or not, that's secondary. They may not right away get up and pray, although usually they do. But it's getting inculcated into them when they're seeing you pray that this is the right behavior. Even if they don't do it later, they'll think that they're doing something wrong by not praying. But if they only hear the words from you, they mean nothing. And later, they will despise you for it and they will call you a hypocrite. So keep that in mind for the entire topic of parenting. And this has to do with, indirectly related to what we're talking about. There's a hadith that's often mentioned by people that Imam Ali alayhi salam says, don't raise your children the manner you were raised. They were created for a time different than yours. I want to add a little thing here. I don't want to spend too much time on it. Very quickly. Don't abuse of this hadith. First of all, this hadith is only mentioned, to my knowledge, in one book. It's Sharh of Nahj al-Balagha by Ibn Hadid al-Mu'tazili, Ibn Abi al-Hadid al-Mu'tazili, not even a Shi'i scholar, and he does not say that this hadith has any chain of transmission to Imam Ali. No one says this hadith is authentic. That's one. Secondly, we can't just take that for cash and say, so therefore, you let the children run loose, it's a completely different world. No. Who says that everything you were taught does not apply to your child? I'm sure that we were all taught all sorts of amazing values growing up. the value of hard work and don't lie and don't cheat and do the right thing. What, you're going to scrap all of that because they were born for a different time? And sometimes people mix up and they say it's culture, therefore we just throw it out, we only keep religion. Who says that everything in culture is bad? And what are you replacing it with? You're going to create a void, and that void will be filled by another culture. Is that other culture better than the one you're scrapping? Think about all of that before you just say, they're created for another time, we have to raise them in a completely different way. Yazeed is the product of Muawiyah. No time, as we said, to go into the details. Muawiyah, in history, it's proven that when he was a governor, they would come to Umar and they would tell him he drinks wine, he eats pork, he wears gold. The platters and the utensils he uses to eat and drink are made of gold. He transacts in bribery and in interest. This is the man that Muawiyah was, in addition to the fact that he completely and entirely tried to annihilate Islam in any way, shape, or form. And we are told that as Muawiyah got really sick at the end of his life, he called his Christian physician. They were all Christians around him. And he told him, I need to heal. I'm about to die. And the Christian physician tried everything with him. Nothing was working. He called him, he's like, nothing is working. What do I do? He tells him, we have one thing left that you could try. He tells him, yes, anything. He tells him, we have this golden cross that we give to people when we don't know how to heal them anymore, and usually they heal when they wear it. So if you want to, I can give it to you. He tells them, of course I want it. And Muawiyah wore the gold cross, and he died. And we are told that when they did the ghusl, the rituals of preparation of the burial of Muawiyah, they removed a golden cross from his neck. This is the story. This is how the golden cross got there. And this is to link it back to the Christian environment that Yazeed grew up in. Now compare this to the type of household and upbringing that you'll find in the families of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam. Compare this with someone like Al-Qasim ibn al-Hasan. Al-Qasim, who was the son of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, who was between 1 and 3 years old when his father was assassinated by Muawiyah. So he grew up in the household of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, all the way until the events of Karbala, at which point he's about 11 years old. 11, 12 years old. He came to Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam on the 10th of Muharram. And he asked Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam whether he would give him permission to go and enter into the battle. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam right away told him, no, I will not let you enter into the battle. He's too young. And he tells him, you are the remainder of my brother Al-Hasan. How can I let you enter the battle? Al-Qasim alayhi salam got very sad, and he went back and he told his mother, and his mother gave him a document. When he saw it, his face got bright, he got very happy, and he came back to Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. And he gave the letter to Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, and the Imam looked at it, and then he turned towards the city of Medina. And he took the paper and he wiped it over his eyes, because this was the writing of Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam, telling his son, when you shall see your uncle all alone, then fight and support him until the end. So Imam Hussein alayhi salam turned towards the city of Medina and he said, may God salute you, may God's peace be upon you, my brother Abu Muhammad. You took care of us while you were alive, and you continue to take care of us after your death. Now, Al-Qasim is about to enter into the battle. There's a quick mention, and I will stop after this. A quick mention of the description of Al-Qasim when he enters the battle. Those who narrate the maqtal to us, they say that a boy whose face looked like the slice of the moon came to face us. And he was wearing a shirt and trousers and 2 sandals. Put yourself in that situation. You have seen all of the companions of Imam Hussein alayhi salam being massacred one after the other. You have seen all the men of your family having been massacred one after the other. There's no one left. And that's why Al-Qasim is coming to Imam Hussein alayhi salam. And he wants to enter into the battle, but Al-Qasim is not a fighter. He's a boy of 11. When you enter into battle, you're wearing metal from head to toe. You have shields. You have things that cover your entire body, as you should. Al-Qasim enters the battle walking with a pair of sandals and trousers and a shirt. And he is facing an army of tens of thousands. And he doesn't care. And we are told the night before, the eve of the 10th of Muharram, we are told that Imam Hussein alayhi salam gave sermons, and he told his companions that they would all be killed the next day. And Al-Qasim alayhi salam, he asked Imam Hussein alayhi salam right after, he told him, and will I be of those who will attain martyrdom like them? And he told him, son Qasim, how do you view death? And he told him, I view death like something sweeter than honey. And at that point, that's when Al-Qasim alayhi salam entered into the battle and was killed. Assalamu ala al-Husayn wa ala Ali ibn al-Husayn wa ala awlad al-Husayn wa ala ashab al-Husayn wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi al-tayyibin al-tahirin.